Greetings, my name is Kerry McLean. Before we get started, Monsieur Andang, can you make the announcement that French interpretation is available?
I will be doing that, thank you. Si vous parlez français, s'il vous plaît, sélectionnez l'interprétation française qui est en bout de cette Zoom. Si vous parlez français, sélectionnez l'interprétation française qui est en bout de Zoom. Merci.
Okay, all right, thank you. So greetings everyone, my name is Kerry McLean and I'm a member of the steering committee that organized the International Commission of Inquiry on Systemic Racist Police Violence Against People of African Descent in the United States. Welcome to all of you who've joined us from different countries for today's press conference. Yesterday, May 25th, was African Liberation Day. We honor and support the ongoing struggles for the liberation of African people throughout the world. I'd also like to take a moment to acknowledge that yesterday was the anniversary of the murder of George Floyd. We continue to mourn him as well as the countless other victims of police violence. We send love to the families and communities harmed by racist police violence. Mr. Floyd's death reignited public discourse on systemic racism and sparked one of the largest sustained mobilizations against racist police violence in history. Racist police violence has been a scourge in the United States since the end of slavery. Black people in the United States and our allies have long engaged in struggle to survive and eradicate that violence. In June 2020, following the brutal murder of George Floyd, which has since been witnessed by the world on video, an international coalition of hundreds of organizations and individuals sent a communication to the United Nations Human Rights Council urging that the UN convene a commission of inquiry to investigate racism and racist police violence in the United States. In an unprecedented move, the UN African Group followed up on that request, requesting an urgent debate on racism at the UN Human Rights Council and also calling for a commission of inquiry to investigate racism. We learned from our contacts that the US pressured some countries to oppose a commission of inquiry. The Human Rights Council declined the request to convene a commission of inquiry, though it did task the UN High Commissioner on Human Rights with preparing a report on racism. Following the UN's decision to not convene a commission of inquiry, the National Conference of Black Lawyers, the National Lawyers Guild, and the International Association of Democratic Lawyers decided to convene a commission of inquiry to conduct the thorough and impartial investigation of police violence in the US that the community had demanded. The Commission of Inquiry's mandate was to investigate systemic, widespread, and grave violations of the rights of Black people by police in the United States and present its findings and recommendations in a report. We assembled a team of 12 experts, commissioners, none of whom are from the United States, to conduct the investigations in an independent and impartial manner. Our commissioners hail from Jamaica, Antigua and Barbuda, Pakistan, South Africa, Japan, India, Nigeria, France, Costa Rica, and the United Kingdom. We conducted live hearings of 44 cases where the commissioners heard testimony from the family members of victims of police violence, testimony from lawyers who represent the families of victims, and testimony from community activists. The commissioners also reviewed reports, legislation, and other relevant materials. The Commission of Inquiry conducted a thorough investigation into anti-Black violence perpetrated by police in the United States, both historically and in recent times, with an emphasis on evaluating the most recent cases and addressing the connection of the current cases to the history of systemic racism. We concluded our live hearings of cases in February, and our commissioners worked alongside a team of rapporteurs to prepare a report. The report has been shared with the UN High Commissioner and shared with the public at a press conference in the United States. You might have seen news articles about our report in the Guardian newspaper and Newsweek. We hope that our report will be utilized widely and, most importantly, serve as a resource to the community. In the past week, we've held press conferences in Southern Africa and East Africa to share the work of the Commission of Inquiry and our report. Today, we present our report to an audience in Nigeria and people in other parts of West Africa. Two of our commissioners will present selected findings and recommendations from the report. We ask for your solidarity and support in advancing the report and seeking implementation of its recommendations. We have several speakers, so let's move forward. I'm honored to introduce Muli Mutunga, former Chief Justice and President of the Supreme Court of Kenya. Justice Mutunga has been working with us to share our report across Africa. Willie?
Thank you, Kerry. I'm here. I'll make the same remarks I made when this report was rolled out in East Africa on 28th of May 2021. We stand in solidarity with the Floyd family. We also stand in solidarity with the other 43 families. And this report must continue to give voice to all the families in their struggles to get justice for their loved ones. I salute and glorify the brilliant work of the commissioners, the rapporteurs, and the steering committee for the timely completion of the report. I wholeheartedly endorse the report. Indeed, this report follows on the footsteps of others in the past. Of special interest is the Russell Tribunal, also called the International War Crimes Tribunal of 1966. This tribunal investigated and evaluated American foreign policy and its war against the Vietnamese people. There have been other tribunals, 1974 to 76, Tribunal on Repression in Brazil, Chile, and Latin America. 2000, the Women's International War Crimes Tribunal, the Torture Tribunal, that dealt with the inhumanity of the Japanese military against women in Korea, Taiwan, China, Indonesia, Okinawa, and East Timor. 2001, on human rights in psychiatry. 2004 on Iraq, 2007 to 2012 on Iran, 2009 to 2014 on Palestine. And in June this year, yet another independent tribunal starts its hearings to investigate whether the Chinese government's alleged rights abuses against the Uyghurs amount to genocide or crimes against humanity. Now, collectively, these initiatives, these tribunals, these commissions are about international justice and the people-to-people solidarities around the globe to end gross injustices. The National Conference of the Black Lawyers wrote to the High Commissioner for Human Rights on 30th March 2021. Thus, the International Commission of Inquiry was empaneled in response to the voices of the families throughout the United States who came together in the wake of the killing of George Floyd to ask the Human Rights Council to focus on this important issue. That request resulted in your mandate, that is the mandate of the Commissioner for Human Rights, to undertake global investigation of systemic racist police violence. And the commission says, we believe our report provides needed information and analysis about the United States to assist in your investigation. The executive summary and the report are summary findings and the recommendations. For us in Africa, we will have to focus on our people, our governments, and the AU. Kenya is a member of the UN Council this year, and a decision of a bench of 5 judges of the High Court of Kenya has delivered a great decision on the sovereignty of the Kenyan people and our 2010 Constitution. All sovereign power belongs to the people of Kenya. The Kenya government enjoys only delegated power by the Kenyan people. We have the networks to mobilize the Kenyan people in this matter to ensure the government does not subvert the will of the people to stand in solidarity with our sisters and brothers in the US. It's our voice that we want heard in the UN Security Council, the UN Commission for Human Rights, and the AU. We look forward to the solidarities of the rest of Africa as this struggle continues. Our resurrected radical Pan-Africanism is about people-to-people solidarities with our sisters and brothers in the African world. We are going to internationalize the challenges of systemic racism. And I call upon social movements, human rights and social justice movements, the media, and the youth of Nigeria and the whole of West Africa to own this report, put it in their current trajectory of national, regional, and global solidarities. Going forward, this is the only way our struggles will receive global solidarity as well. I want to observe that Nigeria and West Africa in general is blessed with great soccer stars. I've spent a lot of my time watching the Nigerian soccer star Inacho, who plays for Leicester every week. I've seen him take a knee, raise a clenched fist in the Clarion Call, which is now being observed in the English Premier League. No room for racism anywhere. This is my request will be for West Africa, and Nigeria can take the lead to make sure at least we have players who can endorse this report. During great matches, I saw the other day when there was a match, a guy from Algeria, ran around the field holding the Palestinian flag. And in another match, Paul Pogba, who is from France, did the same thing. So we can, it's a committee, come up with our own flag, which we can distribute with the faces of the 44 families, the people killed from the first 44 families, so that we can mobilize and make sure that this report gets the international attention it deserves. Finally, I want to say that we should, and that is all of us demand a new planet that is free, peaceful, safe, non-militaristic, non-racist, non-ethnic, gender just, ecologically safe, egalitarian, and prosperous. That should be the global people's struggle in this century. And this report, in my view, is a great entry point to the struggle for such a new planet. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Justice Matunga. We really appreciate your support in sharing our report all across Africa. Our next speaker is Angelique Negroni-Kearse. Her husband, Andrew, was murdered by the police. Ms. Kearse has now established the Andrew Kearse Foundation. Angelique?
Hello, everybody, and thank you for having me and to speak about Andrew. And I just want to also thank the commission for doing this report and acknowledging that that is a systemic racism in the United States and that we all need justice. My name is Angelique Negroni-Kearse, and I am the wife of Andrew Kearse. My husband was killed on May 11, 2017 by Schenectady Police Department. My husband begged for his life over 70 times within 17 minutes and died in the back of the police car 1 minute before he got to the police station. He died from cardiac arrest. And when he was at the police station, they dragged him out of the cop car and placed him on the floor. And one of the captains goes to Officer Mark Weeks and asks him what happened. He says, oh, he was doing that I can't breathe thing all the way here. This is a problem. This is, when it comes to medical assistance, they cannot think that is a joke and that they're lying. It's a problem with Black and brown, and it needs to stop. I've been fighting for 4 long years to have his voice heard and for him to get justice. The grand jury failed to indict Officer Mark Weeks, so there's no indictments. They finally, after 3 years, the chief of police publicly announced it that they messed up on Andrew's case. And then I asked him, are you gonna fire the Officer Mark Weeks? He says, no. I don't understand this. Why would you have this man on the job when you know he did wrong with Andrew? After 3 years, which is on June of 2020, I finally got his law passed, which is called the Angelique Negroni-Kearse Act. And that states that if anybody has any medical distress or mental illness, that the officers or COs, because over here, they be thinking that the inmates are lying as well, that they be held and get a civil charge. That's just one big step. That's just in New York City. And then once again, in June of 2020, in the New York Senate, they introduced the Angelique Negroni-Kearse Act into the Senate, which it got read into the floor twice. This past May 11th, on his 4-year anniversary, I got it reintroduced into the Senate with Elizabeth Warren, Ayanna Pressley, and AOC. Not only does the George Floyd Act needs to pass, but the Angelique Negroni-Kearse Act needs to pass too. Who wouldn't want medical attention? You know how many lives will be saved in order for this law to be passed and get justice for everyone, not only especially for Andrew, because if he had to die in that manner to save one, he didn't die in vain. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Angelique. We deeply appreciate you being here to share how police violence has impacted your family. Thank you.
Oh, one more thing. I know you said it was also, yesterday was George Floyd's anniversary and stuff, but yesterday also was my little girl's, our youngest little girl's birthday, which she was 6 years old. And she has to grow up with no father. She has to grow up with not knowing her daddy. She has to grow up with not having a daddy dance or walk down the aisle or anything. While these officers just live their life. All the families, these are our demands that we want. And I have spoke to several family members, and we want this. We want the United States to reopen all cases, prosecute all officers, and jail all killer cops. And everybody everybody should be aligned with all the families with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Angelique.
Okay.
Okay. Our next speaker is Nana Gyamfi, the president of the National Conference of Black Lawyers.
Greetings. Thank you, Kerry. Thank you, Angelique. Thank you to everyone that is here for this historic briefing, which, as noted, is occurring the day after African Liberation Day, and which also marks the 1 year since the murder of George Floyd and the worldwide expressions of outrage about his cruel murder and the systemic police violence against people of African descent in the United States. On behalf of the steering committee, I want to thank and extend our condolences to you, Angelique, and to all of the families and victims who had to relive the pain and horrors of the senseless, unjustified, and illegal killings of their loved ones at the hands of the police here in the United States. These same police who are allegedly sworn to serve and protect instead serve as executioners of our husbands, our wives, our partners, our children, our loved ones, killed simply because they are Black. We also extend our thanks and appreciation to our 12 commissioners representing international experts from Africa, Asia, Europe, Latin America, and the Caribbean for dedicating the time from their busy professional activities to review witness statements, preside over the commission hearings, listen to the heart-wrenching testimonies, and preparing the thorough and thoughtful findings and recommendations that have been made in this report. We thank our 4 rapporteurs who helped in the coordination of the testimonies of the witnesses during the hearings and introduced the witnesses to the commissioners and assisted the commissioners in preparing their report. We thank our outreach team who reviewed hundreds of cases of the unjustified killings of Black people in the United States, and because of time constraints, selected 44 of the most egregious cases for our hearings. These cases represent only the tip of the iceberg of the systemic nature of racist police violence against Black people in the United States. I want to thank the members of the steering committee who have spent the past 11 months working and preparing this International Commission of Inquiry. The killings that occurred in these cases that were heard by the commission took place in 20 states, in 33 cities across the United States, large and small, and spanned a period over the past 20 years. We heard testimony of the variety of methods used by the police in their wanton, malicious, and intentional killings of people, Black people, across the United States. Unarmed Black women, men, trans, and gender nonconforming people. The victims subjected to various forms of violence. Some were shot, others tortured with tasers, inflicting 50,000 volts of electricity to their bodies, and still others choked and beaten to death. Others were killed when the police used their vehicles as lethal weapons. Victims included people suffering from mental illness. Many were racially profiled in pretextual traffic stops. And in all cases, and in spite of all of the violence inflicted on them, the victims whose cases were reviewed by the commissioners were either unarmed or posed no threat to law enforcement at the time that they were attacked by police. The genesis of this International Commission of Inquiry was inspired by the petition of Paul Robeson and William Patterson, who in 1951 filed a petition in the United Nations entitled, "We Charge Genocide, the Crime of the US Government Against the Negro People." The predecessor of this present commission was the 1978 petition filed by the National Conference of Black Lawyers, the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression, and the United Church of Christ with the United Nations Human Rights Commission in support of that petition in 1979. The International Association of Democratic Lawyers organized an international delegation of jurists from Africa, Asia, Europe, Latin America, and the Caribbean to travel and visit prisons and interview prisoners throughout the United States. The findings and recommendations contained in the report of this International Commission of Inquiry on systemic racist police violence against people of African descent in the United States was filed with the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner of Human Rights on March 31st, 2021. Some of those key findings of fact and recommendations contained in the report will be presented to you by some of the commissioners. Thanks again to everyone that is here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nana. Now we're going to move to selected findings and recommendations from the report. I imagine that you've seen the report, which is available on our website, www.inquirycommission.org. We'll put the link in the chat. It's a massive report. If we attempted to read all of the findings and recommendations at this press conference, we'd be here for a long time. So instead, two of our commissioners will present selected findings and recommendations. First is Commissioner Bert Samuels, who is the Deputy Chairman of the Jamaican National Council on Reparations and leads its legal working group. Bert?
I greet you all, my sisters and brothers from the continent of Africa. On this day, the 26th of May, 2021, a day after the African Liberation Day and one day after the first anniversary of the killing of George Floyd, I greet you by saying there is a lot of work to be done. I was born in Jamaica and live and practice law, including human rights law and criminal law. Because of our colonial past and before then, our 300 years of enslavement by the British without any compensation paid to us to date, Jamaica is a deeply impoverished country. Geographically, we are 1 hour and 20 minutes away from Florida, the nearest state in America to Jamaica. Many Jamaicans in search of a better life materially have migrated to the richest country in the world, America. We therefore have a vested interest in what happens to our brothers and sisters in the US, where police practice have led to the murder of unarmed peoples of color. My own cousin, Steve Excel, was killed by the police in Queens, New York, after they handcuffed his hands behind him in 1996, arising from an argument between himself and his wife. In other words, American police violence has been experienced in a direct way by my own family in Jamaica. I now go to the findings of International Commission of Inquiry on Systemic Racist Police Violence against people of African descent in the United States. My focus will be on the breaches of international law. No one, including the state, is allowed to violate the rights to life of its citizens. In practical terms, this means that no one should be arbitrarily deprived of life. This statement is a summary of Article 6.1 of the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights. The state has an obligation to investigate and punish violation of the right to life. This obligation must be 1, independent, 2, impartial, it must be prompt, it must be thorough, it must be effective, it must have credibility and be transparent. The United States of America ratified the ICCPR in 1992. All the cases heard by the Commission in which Black people were killed exhibited the arbitrary deprivation of the right to life in violation of the provisions of the ICCPR. That is the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. There is also a clear breach in the US of 2 other conventions. That is 1, the United Nations Convention Against the Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman, or Degrading Treatment or Punishment. And 2, the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. We, the commissioners, have been able to conclude that the police in the USA have failed to conform in their practices to the United Nations basic principles for the use of force by law enforcement. Almost all the killings were directed against Black people who, at the time, were unarmed and had committed, if at all, misdemeanors That is, the police were consistently taking the lives of Black people in the context of stop and frisk, traffic stops, and alleged drug raids. Many of the encounters with Black people were in circumstances where there was no reason for law enforcement to approach them as they were going about their daily activities, walking in their communities, or driving in their cars. When compared to white people, the Commission accepted the horrifying statistic that Black people were 3.5 times more likely to be killed by police than white people. And this statistic relates to Black people who had no weapon and in no way attacked the police. Another finding of unsatisfactory systemic violation of the rights of Black people is that was the absence of proper investigation and accountability. As a consequence, statistics shamefully shows that only 1% of police killings in 2020 resulted in officer police conviction. Arbitrary arrest and detention are prevalent in the Black community. Black people are stopped in their vehicles with regularity. The arbitrary arrests and detentions continue unabated, which has resulted in grave distrust of the police by people of color, so much that community members do not call the police when they require assistance for fear of being targeted. In other words, Black people, when they are in problems, they don't call those who are supposed to serve and protect them because they are fearful of those very state operatives. Now we go to the fair trial and the presumption of innocence, which is protected at international law. Arbitrary extrajudicial killings flies in the face of the presumption of innocence and the right to place alleged criminals on trial. The police become judge, jury, and executioners in the US. And very often, videotape evidence confirms the innocence of the victims of police killings. Our conclusion as commissioners is that the only crime committed in these crime scenes, was that committed by the police, who have taken the law into their own hands. America, with its minority Black population, was found to be in breach of the requirement of non-discrimination on the basis of race, gender, disability, and status as child, among other grounds. The United States has failed to demonstrate that it has taken a proactive stance to combat racially motivated violations within law enforcement operations. The United States must account to the civilized world for the fact that though Black people account for 13% of the US population, they are killed at twice the rate of whites. On the other end of the spectrum, there's also an overrepresentation of African Americans in arrest and in the prison system. A worrying statistic is that Black people with mental illness were targeted by the police, even in circumstances where they were called by family members to assist them in taking these persons to medical institutions. The risk of being killed during a police incident is 16 times greater with individuals with untreated mental illness than the other civilians approached and stopped by officers. Approximately 8% of police killings involve persons experiencing mental health crisis, and a staggering 41.1% of that 8% are persons of African descent. Transgender Black women, girls, in violation of the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, were specially targeted by police. Women have been killed with their infants and child in their arms and in full view of their family. Now we go to the prohibition against torture and other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment, which is protected by international law. The forms of torture regularly used in the US by the police on Black people include tasers, compression asphyxia, chokehold, rough ride in vehicles, vehicular techniques, which causes victims to be chased in fear of their lives and ultimately killed. The arbitrary and unwarranted use of these police practices amounts to torture under the relevant convention protected by international law. Most killings listened to by the commissioners began with police responding to suspected non-violent offenses, or in cases where there is no crime at all was reported. The commission found specifically that US law does not comply with international law and standards on the use of force. Let me repeat that. The commission found specifically that the US law does not comply with international law and standards on the use of force. In Jamaica, for example, you can't aim at the chest of a suspect for a traffic violation and fire your firearm as a police officer. You fire so that you may apprehend. You don't fire so that you kill. The US has repeatedly failed to bring its domestic law in compliance with international law. Within the judicial system, there was systemic impunity, complicit legal actors such as district attorneys, and the very troubling application of qualified immunity, which supports the Commission's finding of a policy which is guilty of widespread and systematic attack on people of color. Now we go to police killings, which amount to crimes against humanity regarding murder. For there to be a finding of a crime against humanity, a significant portion of the civilian population must face the threat of murder by the state. Today, 1 out of every 1,000 Black men can expect to be killed by police over the course of his life. I repeat, 1 in every 1,000 Black person in the United States, Black men, can expect to be killed by the police over the course of his life. In the year 2020, 1,127 were killed by police, of which 28% were Black. Remember, 13% of the population is Black. This qualifies as a finding of mass killings at the hand of state actors, and hence a crime against humanity. Now we go to the crime against humanity called torture. For there to be a violation on the United Nations Prevention of Crimes for torture, it must be shown that a large class of the population is subjected to torture. The conclusion of the commission is that such a crime is present in the United States with the frequent use of tasers, restraint, rough ride, and vehicular attack and chokeholds. Crime against humanity of persecution. The overall finding of the commissioners show a prima facie case that people of color are subjected to persecution within the meaning of the Rome Statute. The fact that Black people are targeted and exposed to violation of their rights as citizens by reason of identity to all the violent acts pointed out so far that often results in death in several cases is conclusive proof that as a group, African Americans are subject to crimes against humanity of persecution. In concluding, what has been left in this horrific human crisis facing Black people in America is that there is no domestic remedy available, and it therefore encourages a massive recurrence of the violation of their rights and dignity as humans. Black people in America are now forced to seek justice under international human rights law. It is an indictment on the US that it voted against the Rome Statute that would protect its Black citizens in 1998. And though it signed it in the year 2000, it shamefully withdrew its signature in 2002. It is highly recommended by us commissioners that the United States accede to the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court, being a democracy that should have nothing to hide regarding 13% of its population who helped to build the United States up to 1865 with 400 years of free labor. Finally, the commissioners recommend that the United States President, President Biden, signs the Rome Statute and transmit it to the US Senate for consent to ratification. Thank you, my brothers and my sisters.
Thank you, Commissioner Samuels, for that compelling presentation of findings and your thoughtful analysis. Thank you so much. Okay, and next is Commissioner Hannibal Uwaifo, President of the African Bar Association. He'll present selected recommendations from our report. Hannibal? Let me see. Okay. He just wrote me a message. I think he's having a technical problem. He was just on. Here he is. Hannibal, it's time for you to present your recommendations. Hannibal, you're on mute. Okay. Hannibal, can you hear me? It's time for you to, okay.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Right, sorry, we're having so much network issues here. It's, I don't know, the weather, it's a bit too difficult. I don't know why we're having these problems, but if you're hearing me, hello everyone. Thanks so much, Bert Samuels, Angelique, thanks a lot, Kerry McLean, thanks a million, and all those who are here with us, Justice Willie Mutunga, who earlier spoke. It's a year since the death of George Floyd, flurry of activities. Like I did point out, the journey is just beginning, and the police with the US will not change from our own estimation. And we've seen so many things happen even after the killing of George Floyd. And so we got to continue the struggle, even in a much higher form. So I want to thank all of you. I particularly want to thank the powerful speech made by Bert Samuels, my co-commissioner. And I want to say that African Americans in the United States are Africans. Nigeria is an African country. West Africa is an African country. We are very concerned. We in the African Bar Association takes Blacks in the United States and in the diaspora as our brothers and members. And that's the reason why Black Americans and Blacks all over the world are free to join the African Bar Association because we regard them as members of the association. So we're quite concerned about the activities of the police in the US, the evil activities, which I call evil activities, because of the level of the atrocities committed. And I'm proud to be a member of this Commission of Inquiry. And I'm also proud to associate myself with the findings, which I believe should go a long way to remedying this situation. But we need to spread the news. And as such, I'd like to read out some of the recommendations which have been addressed here to different organizations and to different bodies with regards to the panel of inquiry. First and foremost, the International Commission of Inquiry on Systematic Racist Police Violence Against People of African Descent. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. The International Commission of Inquiry on Systematic Racist Police Violence Against People of African Descent in the United States draws attention to the UN Commission of Inquiry the UN Commission for Rights to the findings and regulations of reports and urges the High Commissioner to support the following in a report mandated by the Human Rights Council in its resolution 14/11/1, 43/1. A. In resolution 43/1, A. Constitution by the UNHCR of an independent commission of inquiry mandated to conduct full investigation into incidents of police violence against people of African descent in the United States and to determine in particular whether the level of violence constitutes gross violation of human rights and whether crimes under international criminal law have been and continues to be committed. B, in order to establish continuous process to monitor systematic racist police violence in the United States, the appointment by the UNHCR, the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, of the independent expert on systematic racist police violence in the United States. Call for the demilitarization of law enforcement throughout the United States. And D, call for an end to impunity and for accountability of police officials resorting to racist violence and unjustified force before independent civilian review boards and in criminal and civil proceedings of the justice system in the United States. Recommendations addressed to the Office of the Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court. Are you sure they are? The Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court should, upon receipt of the report of the Commission of Inquiry, initiate an investigation into crimes against humanity under Article 7, pursuant to his or her powers under the Rome Statute, Article 15. Recommendations addressed to state parties to the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. The state parties to the Rome Statute should initiate investigations of and, where appropriate, prosecutions of U.S. officials for crimes against humanity under their universal jurisdiction as described in Section 7. Recommendations addressed to the executive branch. Recommendations addressed for reparations. The U.S. government that the transatlantic trade in African enslavement, colonization, and colonialism and neocolonialism constituted a crime against humanity and are among the major sources and manifestations of racism, racial discrimination, Afrophobia, xenophobia, and related intolerance. Past injustices and crimes against people of African descent must be addressed with reparatory justice. The US Congress should pass House Resolution 40, the Commission to Study Reparation Proposals for African Americans Act, to establish a commission to examine enslavement and racial discrimination in the colonies of the United States from 1619 to the present, and to recommend appropriate remedies. The commissioners urge the US to consider seriously applying analogous elements contained in Caribbean Community 10-point action plan on reparations, which include a formal apology, health initiatives, educational opportunities, an African knowledge program, psychological rehabilitation, technology transfer, and financial support and debt cancellation. Enact the People of African American Descent and Indigenous Americans Atonement, Reparation, and Justice Act with the objective of correcting structural racism in the US societies, which cannot be overcome without this legislation. To facilitate mandatory representation in legislatures and public employment of these communities in proportion to the percentage of their population, to ensure their access to housing, nutrition, education, healthcare, social services, and other services to atone for genocide and the seizure of their resources and the crimes against humanity committed by those who operated and benefited from slave trade and the subsequent human enslavement, which contributed to enormous capital accumulation and to subhuman status and acute disparities, which continues to adversely impact millions in the United States, fragmenting society along racial lines. They also appoint a commission of racial diverse historians and eminent persons with representations of academics of African descent, indigenous people, and immigrants from the Caribbean, Central and South American, among others, to review and recommend an objective presentation of the history of the United States, of events and people's movements, of the injustices and the Holocaust against the people of African descent over several centuries, of the genocide of indigenous people, and the contribution of all races to the building of a society and a nation. Establish museums and libraries that include accurate films and videos recording the early history of the US, the narrative of slave trade and enslavement, the Holocaust of people of African descent in the US for 4 centuries, the history of the struggle for emancipation, the Underground Railroad, the civil rights struggle led by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and others, and the contribution of the people of African descent, among other migrants of color, to the United States, including museums and libraries, recording the history, life, and culture of indigenous people, and the genocide and injustices perpetrated against them. It is by knowledge and understanding that racial profiling and violence will cease. Recommendations for the United States to ratify and implement international human rights norms. The US government should immediately ratify core international human rights treaties and regional human rights treaties to which the United States is still not a party, with a view to removing any gaps in the protection and full enjoyment of rights therein. Further, the US should remove reservations related to treaties that it has signed or ratified, including those stating that these treaties are non-self-executing. Specifically, Congress should remove the non-self-executing language in the ratification of the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights and or pass full implementation legislation of this treaty, including the provisions of Article 20 thereof, which prohibits propaganda for war and speech, promotes hatred or racial or religious groups, or incites discrimination or violence against people or religious groups. The US should fully implement, monitor, and enforce its obligations emanating from the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, and the Convention Against Tortures and Other Cruel, Inhuman, or Degrading Treatment or Punishment, which the United States has ratified. The United States should also ratify all other international human rights treaties as well as regional treaties. To this end, an interagency body should be created composed of high-level officials from the executive, legislature, and judicial branches at both the federal and state levels to take up steps to effectuate the decisions, resolutions, views, observations, and recommendations of United Nations human rights bodies, such as the Human Rights Council, the treaty bodies and special procedures, and regional human rights bodies. Recommendation to member states of the African Union. The Commission of Inquiry takes note of the powerful concerns expressed by the chairperson of the African Union, the Honorable Musa Faki Mahamat, the Right Honorable Kwesi Kwati, Deputy Chairperson of the African Union Commission, the African Group of Members of the United Nations Human Rights Council, and participants in the HROCS urgent debate following the murder of George Floyd. Several speakers in that debate endorsed the idea of creating an independent commission of inquiry and urged the Human Rights Commission to take action and not become a passive observer. Several people urged the United States to take action to resolve the structural issues and economic inequality that led to the recent events. We heard the call for an independent commission of inquiry. We have acted upon it. We respectfully urge the African Union, the UN Working Group of Experts on People of African Descent, the UN Special Rapporteur on Racism, Racial Discrimination, Xenophobia, and related forms of intolerance, and all relevant special procedures mandate holders to pay the closest attention to the voices of people of African descent in the United States, including victims, survivors, juries, and academics who has evidence of gross and well-attested patterns of human rights violations we have documented and put before you. We urge you to continue to raise your voices and, if necessary, your votes in the Human Rights Council to defeat any attempt to sidetrack world attention or to minimize or excuse concern for the people of African descent in the United States of America. Thank you very much. I do hope that all those who are here with us, particularly our pressmen, will work with the African Bar Association moving forward to amplify some of these recommendations and findings made by the panel. I do know that at the next conference in Miami in October, these issues are going to be in proper focus, and it will be part of the communique at the end of the discussions. So I thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that excellent presentation of the recommendations, Commissioner Uwaifo. And that's really good to hear that this matter is going to be discussed at the African Bar. Okay, I'm going to open up the conversation to see if there are any questions from the press. If there are, you can either raise your hand or you can type a question into the chat. Are there any questions or comments from the press? Okay, I'm not seeing any. So, I'll wrap up the press conference, but I also want to ask the commissioners or Angelique or Nana if they have any final comments before I close.
Yeah, I would like to say something. I would like everybody to understand that it's not just these 43 cases, that there's a lot of us and it needs to change. There's cases 20, 30, 5 years, 2 years, or even maybe today. And we all need justice, and something needs to change. We're tired of Black and brown dying in the hands of the police. And there's no lack of remorse or any kind of justice. Yes, there was a win for George Floyd, but there's so many that needs justice and they need to be accountable. The United States needs to understand that, yes, it is against a crime against humanity. And yes, it needs to stop. And we need to live because we are humans. And I always say this is my slogan. If you want a life of crime with no jail time, just be a cop. And it shouldn't even be like that. They're there to protect and serve, and they do neither. They're judge, they're jury, and executioner. And it needs to stop. Our loved ones, the voices need to be heard, and they all need justice. Thank you, and justice for Andrew Kearse.
May I?
Yes, please.
I just want to say that the experience we have in Jamaica and the Caribbean is that the United States monitor police practices in Jamaica. They give reports on our use of lethal force. And therefore, we do not see that our participation in this inquiry is an interference with the United States, because United States polices the world, and she needs to set an example to the rest of the world and hold herself accountable in the same way she holds China, Cuba, other countries accountable for their human rights records. It is really a contradiction between what they do and what they preach. So you need to step up to the table, America. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Samuels. Commissioner Uwaifo, I think you wanted to make a comment.
Yes, thank you so much. What I want to say is a little bit in line with what Bert Samuels has just said. Here in Africa, particularly in Nigeria, my observation here has been that a lot of people are shocked because the perception about the United States it's very difficult for people to understand whether this is a tales by moonlight or it's something, where they hear about George Floyd, they see on TV. But I can tell you, not much attention is being paid in Africa to some of these things, but the report is now beginning to do the trick, more attention. People want to pay more attention to what's going on in the United States, particularly as regards these frequent killings, which have now become a very big embarrassment. And like I said earlier on, evil acts. But beyond this, in order to galvanize the Africans, we really need to do a lot of work, because it's very difficult for people to understand that America, that has its pie, that has its hand in almost every pie, or that continues to hold everybody like the policeman of the world, like Commissioner Samuels just said, and which we can see all what's going on in the conflict in Palestine and between Palestinians and the Israelis. We can see all what's been going on in between Saudi Arabia and the Yemen, and all what's just everywhere, all over the place, and the kinds of double standards that have been played, unclear policies here and there. People who leave from Africa to go to the US and for better living or for whatever purposes are not able to comprehend that this type of heinous crimes takes place in the US. So I am saying that this is just a beginning. We need to do more work. We need a lot of, unfortunately, press coverages and media activities in Africa are very expensive. But so we need to find a way to put together the funding of media campaign, because it's this type of embarrassment and awareness that may eventually bring the authorities in the United States to their senses. It may well come out of Africa, depending on how well educated and how well sensitized we have. Because if African capitals start questioning US involvement in several things, citing these kind of things going on, it might well be the beginning of a turnaround. Where so we need more sensitization here, because a lot of people aren't just understanding what's really going on in the US. Are this really true? So thank you so much. I just thought I should add that.
Okay, thank you so much, Commissioner Uwaifo. I know that Nana had a quick comment.
Yes, just quickly, because I see that we do have a question. Just to remind folks, as a person whose parents came from Ghana to the United States and had children here, that so many of us are leaving West Africa, coming to the United States without a clue about, as Commissioner Uwaifo points out, what is happening here and police violence. And if you look at the cases that we looked at, they include cases of people from West Africa, of people from the Caribbean. And so we are not immune somehow because we do not come from the United States. And I think it's important for us to understand that when we say we're talking about our siblings, our relatives, that we are really talking about our siblings and our relatives, and we must get involved. We must push our governments. We must push the High Commissioner and the UN to make sure that the United States is held to account.
Okay, thank you, Nana. Okay, so there was one question written into the chat, a question from Colin Steve Ugu. He said he's with the media in Lagos, and he asked, what is the African Bar Association, led by Mr. Hannibal Uwaifo, a commissioner in this project, doing to reduce police brutality and impunity on unarmed Nigerians? Hannibal, I don't know if you'd like to make a response to that.
Well, thank you very much. The Nigeria situation is not as bad as that of the US. Let me first and foremost point that out, because I did say, I did make mention of that during the hearings, that as embarrassing and as daunting as the situation in Nigeria is not as bad as what I came to realize from the United States. I'm not saying that the Nigerian situation is anything good. So definitely not. You know, and so it's several African countries. So what have we done? We have continued to. We can only deal with Nigeria, otherwise it becomes an overkill. We are the continental bar. The Nigerian Bar Association is there. So we work with the NBA, and from time to time we also meet with these authorities and take up cases pro bono and deal with most of these very embarrassing issues. Arising from some of these matters, we've met with the military high command, we've met with the police, we've met with the several other civil authorities dealing with these issues. On June 2nd, the African Bar delegation will be meeting with the Nigeria Chief of Defense Staff. That is my delegation will be meeting with the Nigeria Chief of Defense Staff. That's the highest military officer in Nigeria, to talk about issues relating to so many issues. I don't want to disclose most of the issues there right now, but definitely there are going to be issues related to human rights violations and military dealings and security issues and so many other issues. So within within our limited resources and within our limited space, we keep challenging government. It's not an easy task. Some of these things are rooted in our culture, in our democracy, which is I don't know what to call it. They keep calling it nascent democracy, but there is nothing nascent about it. We are not learning much from it. We move 10 steps forward and 20 steps backwards, and so it's problematic, you know. So we keep doing our best with whatever suggestions you have. At the next conference in Miami in October, we are still going to go back to the same thing, inviting military authorities, inviting police authorities, questioning police actions, you know, going to court, taking actions. Of recent, we are trying to get the International Criminal Court, who is partners with us in a lot of ways, to start looking at some of these issues as international crime. So we keep doing our best. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your response, Commissioner Uwaifo. And Mr. Ubu, do you have any questions in regards to this project and this report? We'd love to hear from you. Okay. All right. So I don't think that there are any additional questions from the media. So we'll just wrap things up. Thank you all for joining this press conference. You've heard from Angelique Negroni-Kearse, whose husband Andrew was a victim of racist police violence. You've heard from respected African jurist Willie Mutunga, who endorses our report. You've heard from two of our commissioners who presented findings of egregious violations of international law and heard recommendations for fighting racist police violence in the United States. We asked the media in West Africa to share this information widely and to share our call for solidarity. Please be in touch if you need additional information or would like to conduct interviews. Thank you. Merci.